Hi there. I am not Paul M. Newberger. I am actually David Belman and one of the founders of the Young Guns movement. And I am joined here today by Tim Stewart. And you are now, as I hear, president and managing partner of DeWitt Law Firm. So first of all, congratulations.
Correct. Thank you.
And welcome.
Appreciate it.
We've been talking a lot about ESOPs over the last few episodes, and we're going to dive a little bit further into that today. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about it. So, we've talked about the type of business owners that are in, are good fits for ESOPs and, the impact. So let's talk about it now from the employee standpoint and how it affects communities. So what would you say to someone who, thinks that an ESOP might be a risky venture for an employee?
Yeah, so I think there is a perception out there that ESOPs are risky for employees, which it hints at a misperception in the marketplace, which is that employees are somehow putting their whole retirement savings into this one bucket, an ESOP bucket. And so the reality is, in the private company market, which is 99% of the transactions we do, as opposed to public companies, what is happening is employees are not putting their own money into the ESOP. They are receiving the stock of the company as part of their compensation. And so, as an example, you could compare it to an employer match or an employer profit sharing contribution to 401k plan. The employees are getting that as a contribution from their employer. Same thing with an ESOP. They're just getting the stock and not using their own money to pay for it. As we've talked in previous episodes.
So basically it's like they're gaining equity ownership in that company over time.
Correct, but they're not having to write a check for it. They're just getting it. And so I think it's important. So it's good for employees to have diversity in their portfolios for retirement. I think, I'm not a financial advisor, but most financial advisors would say that.
Yep.
But if you're getting something from your employer that you're not paying for, it's sort of hard to call that risky just because it makes up a big portion of your retirement.
Sure. But at the same time, it's something that's controllable for them, right? So, they're partly responsible for the performance of that company. So, obviously, as you mentioned in the previous videos, there's sort of that vesting and that, they have something to gain from this if the company does well.
Right, skin in the game. And so that's right. And so the ability to, unlike a 401k plan, which is invested in public securities that you can't control.
Absolutely.
When when you are invested in your own employer and you can actually point out ways to be more efficient or point out ways to make more money to your employer, well, that just increases your own stock price, which increases your ESOP.
Absolutely, yeah. It makes them totally vested in bettering their own company, which is a great thing. So.
Right.
So what rights do employees have in an ESOP company, and then how is it different for an employee in ESOP versus a non-ESOP company? Yeah,
this is one of those things where it's really important to get it right when you're communicating, especially at the beginning part of an ESOP life, so in the first couple of years after an employer does an ESOP. You want employers to understand what an ESOP is and what it isn't.
Okay.
And so what do employees get? They get the stock, and they get to know what that stock is worth every year. And what they don't get is they don't get the ability to control the board of directors. They don't become the quote unquote, owners of the business that are making crucial strategic decisions. So I think it's important to understand that in that respect, it's similar to non-ESOP companies. You're part of a team, and hopefully you know your role well and how you can effectuate success in the organization from that role. But you get to know what the stock is worth every year. You get stock every year. There is also, in a situation where in an ESOP company they get sold to a third party, there are occasions where ESOP companies, usually mature ESOP companies that have been ESOP companies for at least 10, 15, 20 years, can be sold to a third party. If that happens, in some cases, employees get to vote on whether that transaction should go through. So that's another right employees sometimes get an ESOP.
Okay. So I want to jump back on one thing you said that I found was really interesting, and that's sort of, is there a perception out there that when people do the ESOPs that do you think that's a challenge that employees kind of think, well, I get to now make all the decisions because I have some ownership? Is that a typical challenge?
It is. And that's why even in the first rollout of the ESOP, it's important to make employees understand that some things are changing and some things are not changing.
Sure.
And so
that's something that you do as part of your service to help with that?
Generally, we don't participate in the rollout, but as we've covered in other episodes, there are a bunch of advisors that you get that you have relationships with when you do an ESOP transaction. Third-party administrators and other consultants are really good at helping you roll that out to your ESOP.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So ESOPs obviously have a big benefit on culture in the company because there's that sort of the ownership element. So how does it affect culture in a company when you have an ESOP?
Yeah, it's not automatic, meaning you can't just tell employees we're an ESOP company now and presume that your culture is going to change. And so I think what a lot of people say is ESOPs can make a good culture great. And a great culture even greater, but it can't necessarily turn a bad culture into a good culture.
Okay.
So and I think culture generally, I mean, there are a lot of experts on this and people have written lots of books on this, but it's never one thing that makes a great culture. It's hundreds of little things,
and
right?
It's over time, and it's sort of like building blocks that you put together, and you can add to it, and it's the investment that people make in each other, and the common purpose and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly, and so an ESOP can be part of that.
Absolutely.
Meaning we're all part of one team, and we, financially speaking, the better the company does, the better we all do. That's just part of it, though, and I think it can be a crucial part, and it can actually be sort of a headline for your culture, but it's all those other things that add up to what a culture
Correct. It's
is.
not a one dose fix. It's something that will enhance what's already there.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
So ESOPs obviously also are very beneficial not only potentially for somebody that's looking at changing ownership in the future, but it's also beneficial to the employees. How about the community? Does it have an effect on the community?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have seen a number of times business owners come to us and say, I really care about my employees and I want them to share in the future success of the company and reward them for the loyalty they've had to the company. But I also realize that in my community, this company, even though it might not be a giant company, compared to publicly traded companies, in a community, it can mean a lot. Like it can be, if for example, if you were to take a company of 100 employees and sell it to a third party, and that third party shuts it down or moves the company, that's 100 people out of a job, right?
Yep.
So I think a lot of people, when they're talking about rewarding employees, they're also talking about having some continuity in the community. Like, in this community, we've made an investment, and the name on the door means something to this neighborhood, this community. And so when you do an ESOP, you know that building, that company, and those people are going to stay there.
Absolutely.
And so,
that
so we've
affects
heard
their
that.
families and the housing in the area and everything. So yeah,
it does, and we've heard that. I remember one person saying, if I sold our company and they moved it, I couldn't live here anymore because the company is that. I'd be viewed as the person who put all these people out of a job, and that's not every company, but it was. I do recall one person saying that specifically.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So this has been super enlightening. I mean, there's a whole lot more questions that I have, and I'm sure we'll cover that in a future episode. But I want to again thank Tim Stewart of DeWitt Law Firm for sharing more about ESOPs, and stay tuned for the next episode.